Welcome to the Fleet Geeks Podcast. We're here to help develop fleet and transport professionals. Do you want to progress and develop your skills and knowledge? We promise to bring lively conversation and debate around interesting issues and keep you bang up to date with changes in our awesome industry. The Fleet Geeks are a community of professionals, and if you enjoy the podcast, why not join the discussion for free in the Fleet Geek community over on Facebook?
Hello and welcome to the next episode of Fleet Geeks Podcast, and we're doing it slightly differently today. We're actually doing this one as a video due to us being in different locations, which is unless we've got a very powerful microphone and speakers, we're not going to get there. So that's hence just myself and Pete on this one. No, Jamie. Jamie's off doing a Force audit today, so he couldn't join us for this one. But yes, we're doing a video podcast, whatever you call them. There must be a name for those. I don't know.
A vodcast. I've no idea.
Maybe we just made it up. Maybe we've just created something.
A lot of podcasts are done via video as well. But yeah, what have you been up to today, Mark? What have you been doing today, mate?
Yeah, we've been just putting the finishing touches to our transport manager refresher days. When I say finishing touches to day one. I'm not quite got on to day two yet, but day two is going to be a little bit more simpler than day one. And our OLAT course as well. We're really excited to launch. I think you put me on the spot now. I can't remember the dates in July. We're really sort of excited to launch our very own CPC management 2-day management refresher, and we've got an OLAT in the pipeline. It's going to be different. It's going to be it's as you would expect from flagship partners. It's going to be slightly quirky, and hopefully we're going to enjoy some real good engagement with that one. So just been doing that today before going off on my travels again tomorrow to do another round of transport manager training.
Fantastic, mate. I'm actually just having a look to double check and confirm when our transport manager CPC is. I'm pretty sure it is the 26th and 27th of July.
That does ring it.
27th and 28th of July. There you go. So Tuesday, Wednesday and a Thursday.
Our inaugural. I can't even say that word.
Yeah, inaugural transport manager CPC or management CPC. See, that's a whole other podcast. That is. What should we call it? TMCPC, Transport Manager CPC, Management CPC. Yeah. There's lots of different things that people call it.
Oh, yeah, that's some interest. It'd be nice to get some feedback on that, actually, because it's a bit long-winded. I mean, I've always just traditionally known them as Transport Manager CPC Refresher, but it's a bit dull, really, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Maybe we should rename it. Maybe we should go really quirky, like, I don't know, like how to not be shit at compliance.
Yeah. What have you forgotten? Everything I can remember when you feed a pig, though.
I am going to write a book one day, so that I am going to write a book. How to not be shit at compliance.
Yeah.
I think that'll be a bestseller, mate. Cool. So today we've got the question, haven't we, around how often should I have. Oh, to be fair, you told us what you'd been up to, and then I sort of dilly-dallied around the question, which normally means that I'm probably embarrassed because I've been shirking, but I absolutely haven't today. I've been up north, down south, doing children's school runs and all sorts of stuff, mate. But back in the office in my pink t-shirt, and then I'm off to my spin class a bit later, so that'll be fun. But mate, we're here to talk about how often should I have my vehicles inspected. We had an anonymous post on the group today, didn't we, from a member who asked a question around a 12-year-old vehicle that did a relatively low distance of miles on an annual basis. However, was 12 years plus, I think, wasn't it? So it sort of fell into that category. But then, interestingly, it also did whilst it did short distances, it did occasionally travel a long way from base.
Yeah.
So, Mike, how often should people have their vehicles inspected? It was a
really good question, actually, and it did get me thinking, actually, and it's a subject. You know what? You talk to anybody in the industry, and they say 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Everybody seems to think it's 6 weeks. Oddly, in the bus world, mentioned buses. I do buses as well. In the bus world, they tend to talk about days as opposed to weeks. But of course, days doesn't really, it's just a traditional thing. I don't know why. But weeks is important for us, because when we are setting our maintenance inspection intervals, many people don't realise it's actually the operator that sets it. It's operator prescribed. So as a part of your application process, you're going to need to tell the traffic commissioner how often you're going to be inspecting your vehicles and trailers. As I say, I think the industry is traditionally plumped for this 6-week thing. But actually, if you look at the Guide to Maintaining Roadworthiness, which everybody should be looking at and have on their desktops, that gives us a wide variety, a wide range of time scales, and it depends on several factors. One of those factors being how far your vehicles travel, how many miles they do, what kind of terrain, what kind of load they're carrying. And so you can kind of look at that and think, well, maybe 6 weeks is a bit, well, where it ever came from, I don't know, but maybe it's something we can look at potentially. I don't know what your experience is with Pete. Is that pretty much in line with what you've come across in your time? But 6 weeks tends to be the
six weeks tends to be the popular norm. But yeah, and I think there's actually a bit of a misunderstanding in the industry, which is that they think that is the expectation, that 6 weeks is the expectation. I think there's probably many transport managers out there that think that. And actually, I think there's a lot of transport managers, if you put them on the spot and said, you have to apply to the traffic commissioner to extend your maintenance cycle or to amend it, they would think that you needed to. And actually, that's not the case, because we, as the operator, you set out how regularly you're going to maintain the vehicles. You would need to notify the traffic commissioner if there's a change. If you were to decide to change, my suggestion always would be there's a process to follow. So and off the back of listening to this, if you think, oh, do you know what, I might actually change my maintenance cycle, then great. Let us know if you've made yourself some cost savings. And like with anything with maintenance, it's always an offset around cost and safety. And making sure that you take a grown-up approach to that balance of cost and safety. But ultimately, I think there's a lot of operations out there where 6 weekly is too often. And I think there's probably the odd operation where 6 weeks is probably not often enough. Not often enough either on the converse. So I think I was quite fortunate, because I've sort of come up from the workshop background. I've seen a range of operators and having all different cycles. But I think largely the large proportion, certainly that sort of sit in this middle ground of 6 weeks, is probably 75% of operators. But
definitely,
in reality, I would come across, that there was a certain waste and recycling company that must have had. And I mean a large waste and recycling company, not one that either of us have dealt with for a while. I'm not sure if they exist anymore or have been bought out at some point, because there's often a bit of a buy-up cycle of the waste and recycling companies. But I'm sure there was one that was on they had to have 4 weekly inspections. Because I do believe it could be set as an undertaking. It could be set as an undertaking. So, largely speaking, most operators will get to set their inspection cycle, and essentially, subject to there being no regulatory action against an operator, that's what it would be. However, yeah, absolutely, I think the traffic commissioner can take the guidance of the DVSA and put an undertaking that they might need you to be 4 weekly, and I think. Or 6 weekly, or however many. But certainly at Volvo, we had a company that were on a 4 weekly, and I think that was a mandated 4 weekly based on the type of age of the fleet, how arduous the work was, and particularly, the defects were thick and fast even at 4 weeks. So and I think that's got to be the basis, and there should be a measured approach to how you decide whether your vehicles need to be inspected regularly. If you have vehicles that are being inspected every 6 weeks and they've got a list of defects coming through on them, the first thing is are they driver reportable would be the first question, because if they're driver reportable, how's that system working? But let's leave that to one side. if you've got 6 weekly inspections and you get the odd defect coming through still, and you're on high mileage and fairly arduous work, the 6 weekly is probably about right. I'd say, particularly for 32-ton tipper operations, they're fairly arduous type work. 6 weekly probably feels about right.
Well, carrying load, really, yeah.
Based on my experience, but I think I've come across 8 weekly, 10, 12, and even 13 weekly as well. So if I take a 10 weekly, for example, the operator I think of who were on a 10 weekly cycle, they were largely less than 25% loaded at any time, relatively short distances, no, from a terrain point of view, largely motorway type miles, short distances, light work. I would have said fairly new tackle as well, relatively new vehicles on contract hire, they're fully maintained by the main dealer, and 10 weeks is fine, and even down to, and I don't think they make any bones about it. There's certainly a big international operation in the UK who have got a relatively strong maintenance management system, and they had their own fleet engineers who would ensure that MOT failures were thoroughly followed up and those kinds of things. And they actually did fairly long distances, but vehicles were all under 3 years, and they ran like 13 weekly inspection cycles. However, they were so robust in their management of drivers and defects and driver daily checks and all of those kinds of things that didn't seem to be a problem for them either. So, I think I've given a sort of few examples there. I think when it comes to sort of making the decision, I think there's a varying factors. I can't remember what it is on the guide to maintaining roadworthiness. I probably need to pull it out and have another look. But I think off the top of my head, I know you've got a copy there, haven't you? But it's got to be the age of the vehicle. It's got to be the distance it covers, how arduous the work is, what weight it's loaded to, and potentially what is. And I think the factor which is probably the variable is, how well looked after, managed is it by your workshop? Because I think, some workshops will do more preventative type work, and therefore that will, I think it's important to go, if you're calculating brake wear, for example, and if something's getting close to the knuckle and you want to, if you're an operator who wants to run every inch out of that brake pad, for example, you're not the type of operator that should be going on to 8, 10, 12
extended periods.
Because what then happens is you have to have this ethos of, actually, that's not going to make it to the next inspection, so we're going to make sure we manage that.
Hi, it's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're really proud to sponsor the Fleet Geeks podcast. Flagship Partners offer a range of consultancy and training services to ensure that our customers remain compliant and have the best possible knowledge to be able to fulfill their work. If you're interested in support with any of our safety, HR or compliance services, or you want to train to be a transport manager or need driver CPC training, give us a call today.
It might not need replacing at inspection or at service. No. You need to make a point in a week or 2 weeks' time that brake pad needs replacing. But if you are that operator that will leave everything to the last minute because you want to, and that's fair enough too, isn't it? Because margin is everything at the moment. You want to make sure you wear everything
down. I mean, there's not, to be fair, there's not a lot of point in throwing away 50% worn brake pads. That's not doing any good for anybody, really. It's not doing any good for your bottom line. It's certainly not doing any good for the environment. So it's a managed. I think that's the key, isn't it? There, Pete. It's a managed. The key word there is managed. The process is managed, and if you manage it correctly and if you manage it right, you're going to save money, and you're going to be safe. Still, you're going to be operating safely and efficiently. And our mantra has always been, if you're operating safely, you're operating efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. So what does the guidance say? What does the guidance say around numbers of vehicles and number of weeks and that kind of thing? Because I know there's a rule around 12 that it states categorically 12 years, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I got caught out by a student. Funny enough, I always say my mantra has always been, 12 weeks. If the vehicle is 12 years old, 6 weeks, no more than 6 weeks. However, he said, that's not quite the case, is it? And I said, well, go on then, tell me. And proceeded to tell me that this particular guy runs a fleet of stuff that's used on film sets and stuff like that. He said, no, he said, if you look at the guidance actually says that if, in the case of a vehicle that doesn't do many miles or is very rarely used, that you can actually extend that 6 weeks period. So I kind of, as you do, I'll take a look at that in the break, and as you do, Googled it, and it was quite right. You can, if you make the case that this vehicle is very rarely used. But I think interesting from that point, from the question that sort of set the whole wheels in motion, no pun intended, for this podcast, was that this vehicle was not used very often in this scenario that we were given. It isn't used that often, but when it does, it goes abroad. And I think the consensus of opinion was you wouldn't want a vehicle breaking down abroad. It's going to cost you a fortune. So, and also, stuff can wear out without being used, if you know what I mean, can't it? It can deteriorate.
It ages.
Yeah. And you wouldn't want
10 years for tyres, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. So, if you've got a vehicle that's getting on a bit, it might have some tyres on that are 10 years old and more if it's not really used. I think the question sort of kind of talk about 8,000 miles or 8,000 kilometers a year, which is nothing for a HGV. Is it absolutely nothing? Mrs. Miggins will use her mini metro more than that, going down to the shops and collecting her pension. So, but the same thing, it could deteriorate over the time. So I would always say 6 weeks for a 12-year-old vehicle. I've always said that's the rules. It's not the law, but it's the rules. But evidently, if you make the case that it's, I think the other common misconception there, Pete, I don't know if you've come across this before, is people say, if you say 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever you decide on, that's the same across the whole of your fleet. And of course, it's not, because you can have tractor units, different service, different maintenance inspections to trailers, and even two different vehicles on different inspection frequencies. It's not. Absolutely. Again, I think it's common misconception is that once you've set it, and it's set in stone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I think, and what you're saying, like dynamic planning, I think actually should be part of any operation, because as transport managers, we should be regularly monitoring our MOT pass rate, and we should also be monitoring our service and inspection sheets on a regular basis. And as part of that, I think sitting down and speaking to maintenance providers and asking their opinion and having feedback from them and having a record of those meetings and those minutes with them, and certainly reviewing historic sheets. I would say if you have a really strong MOT pass rate and you've got vehicles going in for inspection and having no defects, then you've potentially got a case to be thinking about potentially extending those inspection cycles, because it sort of goes to show that you haven't got issues. But I would say, on the other hand, if your vehicles are going in for inspection and they're coming out with lots of defects, and that's potentially an issue, and you need to have that addressed. And MOT pass rate is vital. Ultimately, what's the DVSA examiner going to judge you on? They're going to judge you on their MOT pass rate, and they're going to look through your service sheets to see what's really happening.
So I always put, going back into trainer mode, when we're trying to teach people about scenario-based questions like you get in transport manager exam, as classic one I always use to demonstrate that is that your boss has just very kindly bought you a whole new fleet of vehicles, and you're very proud that you've got this nice new shiny fleet sat out there, but no disrespect, bosses being bosses are going to want something in return. So boss says, well, look, I've just spent £1 million on these new vehicles. What am I going to get in return? And as a transport manager, you might suggest, well, look, I'll tell you what we'll do, boss. We'll save ourselves a few quid on inspections. And instead of only inspect them in 6 weeks, we'll inspect them in 8 weeks, which is going to save us, X number of inspections per year to pay back this investment. But then my challenge then would be to the students, well, that's all very well and good. You would do that. That's fine. But what would you do as a transport manager to make sure that was not going to detract from road safety? And what we're kind of looking for them to come back is, well, okay, well, I'd maybe I'd do some more toolbox talks. I'd train the drivers. I'd instigate some more gate checks. I'd review all my inspection sheets to make sure that there wasn't a pattern building up, or we hadn't got some more defects on that. So you're absolutely right. It's dynamic. You've got to move. You've got to sort of pull those levers and what have you when you do these kind of things. And I think that's part of understanding.
And I think all of this needs to be drawn together. If you're a transport manager and you're sort of scratching your head at what to do next, my suggestion is to create what I call a vehicle maintenance policy. And what that maintenance policy will do is you will outline, I would outline your fleet of vehicles and what type of work they do. And particularly if you've got a mixed fleet doing different operations, you might have skip wagons, you might have tippers, you might have general haulage, what have you, and assess each area of your business based on what you think the needs are, and then how often you'll review that and review how regularly they're inspected and your MOT pass rate and all of those things, and just outline that and just demonstrate that you've got a process. There's a method behind the madness rather than a, lick of the finger and feel what the wind's blowing like. Take a measured and structured approach and rationalization. And I think that potentially someone might be able to pick holes in your forethought, but if you're following the process that you've set out and go that way, you could even test if you wanted to extend. Why not test it on, if you've got a big fleet of vehicles, why not test that on one vehicle or two vehicles in your fleet just as a test? And you can actually outline, you can amend the policy to go, do you know what, these vehicles on general haulage, they're currently on 6 weekly. I'm going to test these two vehicles, registration numbers, make a record that you're doing it and extend them to 8 weeks, and just see over the period of the next 12 months, if there are 8 weeks, what the difference in defect ratio to service is, and go, actually, after a year, that's fine. And the MOTs went through and what have you. I'm going to, you could potentially take a measured approach to extending things as well and do a bit of a test and measure, really. But I think documenting the process, I think, is really important. Naming the vehicles and the type of work they're doing and the distances they're covering, and then just quarterly having a review. Are they doing the mileage that we expect them to do? Because this is the other thing. Workers perceived and workers done are two different things. So workers perceived when writing a policy, and then actually going in 3 months time, actually how far has it gone?
Compare,
have I been factual in my estimations, or have they been guesstimations? And actually sort of monitor back and look at the defect rates and that kind of thing. I think, but having like a policy in place where you can say, and then like you say, you could have this set of vehicles on 6, this set of vehicles on 8, and this set of vehicles on 10, because they're all doing different types of operations and different distances. But I definitely think there'd be an expectation to ensure that you really got the eye on the ball and you're monitoring the performance of how those are going.
Yeah, absolutely, spot on. I think that was so. From this is what this podcast's all about, isn't it, Pete? It's a great example from one question on our Fleet Geeks group on Facebook. We've got a discussion topic, and that's, I think, very grateful to the people who take the time and trouble to post online and post the answers as well. Nobody will ever agree 100%. A lot of it's interpretation, but it's fantastic for us to get these topics out of those questions, and this is a perfect example of that, eh, Pete?
It's funny, isn't it? Because we said what should we talk about on the podcast today earlier, didn't we? And then the question came on into the group, and it's like, it's just perfect, isn't it? Perfect.
What a great question! What a great question.
Yeah,
so, anonymous, but hey, thank you, Mr. Anonymous. That was a great question.
But that's what that service is there for as well, isn't it? The service is there. It's only the administrator of the group will ever know who's done that, and that's me. So, I'm not going to share. If someone wants to post something anonymously, that is their. That's their prerogative. So no one will ever get to know, because it's important for the integrity of the group that if we have an anonymous feature, I've got to ensure that it is anonymous. So.
It is anonymous, and it's great because it's allowed us to answer that question. It was a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much for those that do part of the group and engage, and make sure you do join the Fleet Geeks community on Facebook. We've also got a new LinkedIn page. Please go over to LinkedIn and like and follow that page on LinkedIn, and just make sure you subscribe to the podcast. We've got networking coming up at the end of each month on the Wednesday as well, last Wednesday of the month, networking. So it'd be fantastic to see you there if you're listening. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you soon. Take care. Cheers.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share with your friends and colleagues too. Join us for free on Facebook with the Fleet Geeks community for transport and fleet managers. Fleet Geeks offers ongoing professional development, networking and mentoring too. So get in touch with me, Pete Rushmer, on any social media platform to find out more.